our last program, we talked about Project JEHOVA, a government project concerning the UFO that was discovered outside of Roswell in 1947. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me this UFO phenomena.
JR, Project JEHOVA was the response of the Harry Truman, Dwight David Eisenhower administration to the discovery of that little crashed UFO with its occupants that were whisked off to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And many of you have heard the story. The real upshot of this whole matter, JR, is this. Were those little astronauts from outer space, or were they something else? Well, biblically, we take the position that they were a satanic counterfeit, Satan and his minions posing as astronauts from outer space and then spawning what became a top secret organization within the United States government, the National Security Agency, Project Majestic 12, and so forth. And in this way, these little UFOnauts came into some power in the United States government, changing the very nature of our constitutional government. Well, JR, that's where the story begins.
Because for several different occasions since 1947, there have been flaps of UFOs. And they all seem to center around Israel.
Yes, indeed. The
birth of Israel in 1948, the wars of Israel in 1956, 1967, 1973. And the UFO phenomena is getting more exciting all the time. And there was a time when scientists in the United States and many professors in college campuses across America believed in evolution simply because they did not believe in God. There was no God. God did not create us, because if we admit there is a God who created us, then we have to submit to his laws and rules of conduct. So the scientific community has decided that man was a product of evolution. However, in more recent years, especially with the development of DNA, or with the discovery of DNA and the double helix DNA, some scientists have decided that it's too complex for mankind to have evolved. So they say that we had to be seeded here by some kind of alien race. They certainly don't want to call them God, because they would then have to admit that there's somebody more important. But scientists today think, that somebody who are our equals directed the DNA seeding of planet Earth. This is a far-fetched phenomenon, isn't it?
Well, it is, JR, but it has its roots in the fact that 20th century and now 21st century man has come to believe in the existence of these little UFOnauts, UFO drivers from outer space. It's very interesting. Back in the late 60s, I think everybody remembers Erich von Däniken. He wrote the book called Chariots of the Gods. The thesis of this book, JR, was that the ancient gods written about by the Sumerians and Babylonians and even in Genesis were none other than ancient astronauts who came here to direct the genetic manipulation of mankind. His second book, also published in about 68 or 69, Gods from Outer Space, extended his thesis, and it was his idea, I think extremely well expressed in popular terms, that man was not created by God, capital G-O-D, but rather by the gods from outer space, these little UFO drivers. And so this comes down to us in the 21st century, JR, as an actuality. The headlines. We've just read about Claude Vorilhon, a man called Rael, and his cult, the Raelians, who claim to have cloned a human being. This story has its roots in the gods from outer space motif.
He appears on the front of UFO magazine. And Gary, tell us about this man and his trip to in a UFO, according to him.
According to him, as a matter of fact, he says, and I'm holding his book here, published in 1975. And by the way, we're not offering any of these books. This is just for your information. Space aliens took me to their planet, says Claude Vorilhon. a.k.a. Rael, the leader of the cult. And by the way, he's wearing the symbol of his new religion. The Raelians' religion just happens to be a Star of David, which encloses a swastika.
Wow.
Thereby incorporating into one symbol two opposing ideas. Rael, J.R., in 1973, Claude Vorhilone, race car driver who lived in France, was visited by a UFO driver named Elohim. Where have we heard that name before? The little Elohim was a small creature, about 4.5 feet tall, with a black hair and a black beard. And he said, "Claude, I've chosen you to found a new religion and, what's more, to participate in the making of a new man." He said, "We, the Elohim, created you long, long ago by manipulating your genes, and now we have come back to complete our work. You are to be the man who completes it for us, and you're going to found a new religion. It's going to be, your new name is going to be Rael, your religion is going to be the Raelians, and you are going to clone a new human being and thereby start a new sequence of upward mobility. We're going to create a man better than man has ever been before." Well, J.R., that's, isn't that an amazing story?
Absolutely wild. If you think that's wild, now comes along Michael Drosden's new book, The Bible Code 2, which he calls The Countdown. And he talks about where the Bible codes came from. Of course, he being an atheist cannot believe in the existence of God, and so he's decided that the one who put the Bible codes in the Bible is called the encoder. And he's not God.
That, by the way, that has a capital E.
Yes, capital E, the encoder. And he believes that this encoder was an ancient astronaut and that he came to planet Earth and seeded Earth with human DNA and plant DNA and animal DNA and populated this planet. And some of the early people, of course, mistook him for God. But he's not God. He's an equal. He's not a superior. And that's the point. You know, he goes on to say, and I read here from page 144, he says that he called the most eminent authority in the world, Francis Crick, the Nobel laureate biologist who discovered the double helix, the spiral structure of DNA. It was one of the greatest scientific discoveries of all time. Crick himself declared in the first moment of revelation, quote, "We've discovered the secret of life." So on this telephone, he's called this famous scientist, and he says, "Is it possible," I asked Crick when I reached him at his Salk Institute in San Diego, California, "that our DNA came from another planet?" And here's Crick's answer. "I published that theory 25 years ago," said Crick. "I called it directed panspermia." So, some of the Nobel laureates, Nobel Prize-winning scientists who have espoused Darwinian evolution for so many years have now decided that DNA is too complicated for mankind to have developed out of the ooze and mud of some primordial ooze. And so man evidently has to have a designer. And therefore, these ancient astronauts have come to planet Earth over the, millennia ago. In fact, he says over 3.5 billion years ago. And of course, they say the Big Bang only came 4 billion years ago. That's what Michael Drosden says in his book. But I understand that there are scientists who believe that the universe is 12 to 15 billion years old. So surely the Big Bang could not have come 4 billion years ago.
Well, JR, we've got a break coming up, but before we go, I want to plant this one idea with you as we come back to discuss this in more depth. Just get used to one thing. The tired, old, worn-out Darwinian explanation of human origins is gone forever. The idea that something arose in the muck and evolved upward to become complex life is gone. The scientists don't even believe that anymore. Right. They believe that the gods from outer space came here and did some sophisticated genetic manipulation, creating humanity. Well, we're going to talk more about this in a moment.
Yes, that opens a can of worms, and you can't get those worms back in the can, and we'll tell you all about it, of course, when we come back in just a moment. Remember, we didn't come from visitors from outer space. We came from one who is called God. We'll be back in just a moment. So Drosnin believes in the encoder, not God. And he and this famous Nobel laureate, the man who discovered the double helix DNA, both believe that the ancient astronauts came and seeded man on planet Earth. In fact, Drosnin, Gary, has found the location in the Bible code of where we came from. It's down at the south end of the Dead Sea, in a place that of course the Bible calls Sodom and Gomorrah. If we were to evolve from anywhere on earth, it'd be a sad state of affairs if we all came from Sodom and Gomorrah.
It would indeed. Oh boy. Well, J.R., the most brilliant men in the world, if they are not enlightened by the Spirit of God, can come to some strange conclusions. You know, Dr. Francis Crick, the man about whom we spoke a moment ago, has to be one of the most brilliant men on the planet. In 1953, he and Dr. James Watson co-discovered the existence of the DNA molecule, which stores the genetic information of all life. And working over the years, they discovered the DNA code. That is how all of the particles of DNA fit together to form genes and chromosomes and cells. And JR, as Dr. Francis Crick began to work over the years, he came to a conclusion. And that is that the DNA molecule is so complex in its structure that there's absolutely no way that it could have formed accidentally, as in spontaneous generation in the ancient mire.
Yes. Now, I heard you read an article about Dr. Crick a few moments before we began the program. And it mentioned something about him bordering on creationism. Could you read that to us?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have several quotes here. And before we get into those quotes, let me just suggest something interesting. Back about 1908, a brilliant physicist by the name of Svante Arrhenius proposed what he called the panspermia theory, that life originated on Earth with the arrival of spores that had drifted through space from other planetary systems. And they finally landed on Earth, and they germinated about 3 to 3.6 billion years ago, and that's when life began on planet Earth. Well, taking that panspermia idea, Francis Crick said, you know, this may hold some water, because the DNA molecule is so complex, I can't imagine it having spontaneously originated. In fact, it must have come here from elsewhere. Francis Crick said this, and I'm quoting him: "Every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I determine that I'll never write another one, because there's too much speculation running after too few facts." And he said, quote, "An honest man armed with all the knowledge available to us now could only state that in some sense the origin of life at the moment appears to be almost a miracle." How about that, J.R., for a quote? In other words, this famous man of science says life is a miracle. He writes in a book, the title of the book is Life Itself, and he notes that the probability of a protein randomly forming in the proper sequence is about 1 chance in 10 to the 260th. And you have to consider that the total number of elementary particles in the entire universe is only 10 to the 80th. Therefore, Crick says, there is, in fact, a vanishingly small hope of even a billion monkeys on a billion typewriters ever typing correctly, even one of Shakespeare's sonnets during the present lifetime of the universe. And of course, a Shakespearean sonnet is not nearly as complicated as a DNA molecule.
Well, Gary, for a scientist to arrive at that conclusion, by the way, creationists have arrived at that conclusion. Mathematicians have arrived at that conclusion long ago. And for the scientists to come along now, that's fine with us. That means that we're on a different level now, a different playing field, trying to convince the world that we were created by God. But they say, no, by ancient astronauts. So Gary, let's consider the possibility that some ancient race of people, after the Big Bang and the universe came into being, some planet somewhere on a far-off galaxy was the right size, the right distance from its sun. It had the same kind of atmosphere, plenty of water, and somehow or another this race evolved or came about and then became so brilliant that they could invent DNA. We got to stop right here and ask, where'd their DNA come from? Who invented them?
Absolutely. This begs the question. In fact, it only Crick's idea of panspermia, and by the way, he was subsequently, JR, questioned on the panspermia idea, and he later came up with the idea that, well, it's very possible that beings in some ancient galaxy sent rocket ships into the universe which landed here with the stuff of life, which then took root. And by the way, he speculates on this in very real terms, as though it actually happened. But again, that only postpones the creation by one step, because as you say, it begs the question, who created the people who sent the life to planet Earth?
In the final analysis, you're going to have to look into the Bible for the answer. Drosnin says that the double helix DNA has the same kind of design as the Bible codes. In other words, he says the Bible codes are double helix as well, which means then that the same one who seeded the earth with all kinds of DNA, plant, animal, and human life, also wrote the book and put into the book messages to the future. How did this one back 6,000 plus years ago know what was going to happen in the year 2000, 2003, 2006 in order to put, well, Drosnin's got the answer. He says, you know, they had to get into a spaceship that could go faster than the speed of light in order to get here from some far-off distant galaxy. You start measuring the universe, you'll find out that they had to go pretty fast. The speed of light itself takes millions upon millions of years to get here, and surely those who seeded Earth with DNA didn't have millions of years lifespans, and their ship was too small to populate generation after generation after generation. And so the big question is, you know, how did all of this fit together? Well, he says that they were time travelers. That solves the problem. They went back in time and got here fast enough through time that they could write the Bible because they have seen all of human history. So they wrote the Bible and put the Bible codes in so that we could look at it and see the various things he's got listed in his book.
JR, we have come to the place in human history where science fiction has replaced science. It's just that simple. And even men like Francis Crick speculating about rocket ships sending life to this planet. A Nobel laureate, the co-discoverer of DNA, saying that's how life had to exist. It's just too complicated to have evolved. And JR, let me say this one thing rather quickly, and that is that Claude Vorhilon, a.k.a. Rael, was told by the little man in the UFO called Elohim. He said, he was told, you know, Claude, you must go out and create a new, renewed human being. Why? Because every so often we have to genetically re-engineer people to kind of bring them up to the level of immortality. We, the Elohim, created them years ago, but you have to renew them. JR, I would just have one answer, and that is John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And you know, John goes on to explain that Word was incarnated in human flesh. He created everything, and He predates everything.
And you know, the Word is coming back to this earth. Jesus Christ is going to come back to this earth and set up a kingdom and rule as King of Kings and Lord of Lords for 1,000 years. Before that happens, of course, the devil's going to show up and set up the Antichrist government. So, wow, the Bible is true. Trust in God. We'll be back in just a moment.
I'd like to talk to you for a moment about an exciting new offer from Prophecy in the News. And that offer is the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary. Beautifully bound, beautifully produced, top-notch scholarship, and every page of these 4 volumes covering Matthew to Revelation is in full 4-color process. You're going to find an amazing array of maps, charts, artists' conceptions, sidebars, easy to read, study aids, and as I said, the scholarship, well, Clinton Arnold, the general editor, Talbot School of Theology, you're going to find the Bible interpretation right on the mark. Now, this is different from anything Zondervan has done before. Well, let's look, for example, at Volume 1, page 172. Now, this is the Matthew study, and you'll find in here the story of the crucifixion of Christ at this point. But you'll also find a picture of the potter's field, Akeldama. You'll also find a sidebar about Barabbas and the thieves who were crucified with Christ, talking about the cultural ferment of the day, the fact that those thieves were really revolutionaries. You're also going to find a sidebar about the life of Pontius Pilate, including, by the way, the famous Pontius Pilate inscription, photograph of that. In short, you're going to receive a broad background, all the subjects that impinge upon the crucifixion of Christ. That's what's meant by Bible Backgrounds Commentary. Now, normally the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary retails for $159.95. At Prophecy in the News, we're going to make it available to you for only $134.95, and as an added inducement to ordering right now, we're going to include a free bonus, and that is the 3 VHS videotape set right in front of me. It's called Deciphering Daniel. It contains 12 studies, one for each of the 12 chapters of Daniel. It's an exciting study, and JR and I go into depth in these 3 VHS videotapes. Normally $49.95, yours absolutely free. Plus, we're going to also give you a free subscription, 1-year subscription to Prophecy in the News, our monthly magazine, and that would be valued at $29.95 altogether. This would be a $240 value, yours for only the price of the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary, and that's $134.95. This Zondervan publication is brand new. It's something very, very timely. Order today. Call the number on your screen right now.
Somewhere in the outer reaches of another dimension, there's a war going on between 2 species. The leader of one is called Michael. The leader of the other is called the devil. He's coming to this earth. He's going to establish a world government. The government of the Antichrist, Gary.
Absolutely, and by the way, when you read about cloning in the newspaper, and you're going to be reading about it a lot in the near future, just remember where it comes from. It comes from the evil desire of mankind not to acknowledge God, but to acknowledge man as creator.
Yeah. But I want you to know that Jesus is coming back, and He's going to put down the enemy and establish a kingdom. Trust Him as your personal Savior. He alone can give you eternal life. This is J.R. Church and Gary Striemann. Until next time, keep looking up.
Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on audio tape, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on videotape. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.